Ishizu Tearlaments made me realize we are not as good as we think we are. Let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly.
But before that, guys, we're having a huge Black Friday sale over at HeadtoHeadBattles.com. Go check it out right now. And back to you, Susu.
What's going on, guys? My name is Susu from HeadtoHead Battles, and today we need to talk about the Tier 0 format that we finally witnessed, the ways to beat it, and one of the biggest problems that people are simply not talking about. If you guys like content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and make sure to join in on the conversation down in the comment section down below. YCS Pasadena just ended, and Ishizu Tearlaments took up 80% in Top Cut, but that made me realize something. So first off, let's start with what's good in this format. Now, I know a lot of you guys are thinking, Susu, there is nothing good about this format. And my rebuttal to that is maybe you lean more towards casual than competitive than you actually think.
What did he say?
Before you go hit that dislike button, just hear me out. In the competitive scene, and I mean at the highest levels, most players enjoy formats where decks are extremely technical while at the same time being able to outthink your opponent, right? Ishizu Tearlaments have introduced something that we haven't had in a really long time, and it really boils down to high-level technical play. Now, I'm not saying this deck is only to be played by higher-level players, but it's not a deck you can just pick up and play, right? Although the deck is extremely powerful, it's not a deck you can just combo on a whim and, just hope to win games just because the deck carried you. This deck requires a level of play that no other combo decks have really touched yet. Now, you can see that as power creep, or you can see it as a difference in skill gap between those who deem themselves competitive and those who are actually competitive. Let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are on what I just mentioned, and let's quickly move on to how to beat Ishizu Tearlaments. Okay, so the first card that you can use is going to be my favorite card of all time, Dimension Shifter. Now, this card is insanely good against a matchup, and if they don't have Orange Light in their hands, it's pretty much FTK against the deck. The downsides are that you are going to be affected by it as well on your own turn, so if you're playing this card, make sure that you can garner the advantage that your opponent could not, and make sure that you have a ton of interruptions and follow-up, because if you don't, you still might end up losing the game simply due to the fact that Ishizu Tearlaments can generate an ungodly amount of advantage on either turn. The next set of cards that could possibly win you a match is going to be the Ishizu cards, okay? Who would have thought? If you can't beat them, join them. Now, the new cards out of Mavens are Earth Fairies, which means you can take advantage of them in a lot of other decks, right? Being able to mill Keldo or Medora while playing another entirely different engine is insanely powerful. Just because Ishizu Tier held 80% of the top cut doesn't mean you can't play the Ishizu archetype in other decks. Let me know in the comment section down below what other decks can utilize the Ishizu cards, and let's move on. Next, we have the Bestial cards. Now, the engine is much smaller than the usual go-to, simply due to the fact that you really don't need Lubellion. Most decks are only running triple Magnamit, the double Druis Worm, and a single Saronir. These cards serve more than one purpose, okay? The first one is, obviously, to be able to banish a tier monster so that the fusion doesn't resolve, but more importantly, they're a really good way to make your opponent use their Keldo or Mudora to shuffle back the resource instead of it getting banished and letting you summon out a huge beatstick. As we saw in the finals of the YCS, the player was able to get the other player to preemptively activate the Ishizu cards while having a way to push through the rest of the interruptions. They also allow you to play no other actual hand traps in the deck because they simply act as hand traps in the current meta. Now, let's talk about Abyss Dweller Turbo. If your deck has a consistent way into rank 4s, Dweller is definitely a card that you want to have in your extra deck. Usually in the mirror match, or if you're playing a deck that can simply make it, it's FTK against the Ishizu tier matchup unless they have droplets or imperm or another way to counter it. But again, like you saw in the YCS Pasadena finals, even though the player was under Dweller for 4 freaking turns, the game still wasn't completely decided, and there were a bunch of plays that could have still been made. My word of advice is this: even if you have Dweller on the field, make sure you have a bunch of other ways to interrupt your opponent, otherwise they can simply battle phase into it, set up their own board, and just play on your turn. Next, I want to talk about a tech that you might have missed, but you definitely want to try. Mass Change 2 and Mass Hero freaking Dark Law, baby. Now, this does require you to use a slot in your extra deck, but being able to like brick, normal summon a card, set Mass Change 2, and then watch your opponent pass because they can't out Dark Law, it has to invoke like feelings of grandeur. Comment down below if you think this tech is better than the ones that we talked about so far, because in my opinion, I think this is one of the better techs simply because it doesn't lose to an early Dark Ruler, you can't droplet under Dark Law, and you can wait for your opponent to commit a card on the field so they can't even imperm this card. The last card we need to talk about is Necro Valley. Now, this card is insane, like actually insane if it stays on the field, but you better be able to play under your own Necro Valley. The way this card works against Ishizu Tearlaments is it's pretty simple. They cannot move cards out of the graveyard, which means it turns off all the Tears, Medora, and the Keldo effects. Now, that doesn't mean they can't activate it. So don't get tempted to chain your cards to them because they were never fusion summoning or shuffling back anything anyways. I truly think Necro Valley is an amazing card to be playing in this format over Mystic Mind, simply due to the fact that you don't need to worry about being stuck under your own Mystic Mind. The tier engine has trap cards that can send cards off field and their field spell to blow up cards. Now, unironically, Mystic Mind doesn't have as much pull as it did in the last format. Necro Valley is just infinitely better in today's Yu-Gi-Oh! And should be a card you should seriously consider. Also, let me know in the comment section some other cards that you have seen success with against Ishizu Tearlaments. Now, before we move on to the ugly part of the conversation, I just want to talk about two cards that are actually kind of bad that people think are good. And trust me, I was one of those people, okay? Neko Mane King and Earth Shattering Event. Both of these cards are mandatory, which means they need to be Chainlink 1. Which means your opponent, if they ended up like milling 8 to 11 cards, they can still use all of the Chainlinks and still put up a board even though it's in their end phase. Now, don't get me wrong, these cards are still really powerful, but only if your opponent gets unlucky with the mills. Like, what a time to be playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Where a deck that relies on RNG is the best deck in the room. Now, on to the ugly part of the conversation. This format really makes it hard for players to utilize their deck building skills, okay? Now, let me explain. The Ishizu Tearlament deck is pretty much solved, and what that means is there really aren't that many flex spots in the deck where you can get spicy with it. Now, that necessarily isn't a bad thing, but if you're a top level competitor, or rather if you think you're a top level competitor, but you're actually a wannabe elitist and you're busy net decking, it really takes like the enjoyment of deck building out of the game. I built an Ishizu Tearlament deck way before the YCS was even announced, and seeing the topping list be very similar to something I built literally months ago makes me wonder like how much deck building skill is involved in today's format. Now, the conversation gets even worse than ugly, and I really don't have a word to describe it, but I know I'm gonna ruffle a lot of feathers here. You are not as good as you actually think you are, okay? Just let that soak in a little bit, all right? This deck has finally shown the massive gap between the level of players in the game. Jen recently took this deck to locals and played in the mirror match, and boy oh boy, were there a ton of suboptimal plays. Now, I'm not roasting anyone, but you need to realize, trying to resolve Chainlink 10 back to back to back is not simple to do. A lot of players are going to get baited into activating their Medoras and Keldos, and they simply might end up ending their own turns because either they got penalized for a misplay or simply because they ran out of plays due to a misplay. I mentioned this in another video, but I truly believe that from here on out, the ability of casual players to play against quote-unquote competitive players is going to be extremely difficult. It's going to be up to the Yu-Gi-Oh community, but hopefully this doesn't become a huge turnoff for the casual player base to, you know, like transition into higher competitive play, all right? So let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are on this topic. But boys, that's gonna be it for me today. If this video helped you beat an Ishizu Tearlament player, like this video and make sure to join in on the conversation in the comment section down below. Also, make sure to join our Discord for giveaways, follow us on Twitch, and click that, is it gray now? The gray subscribe button down below. Also, don't forget about our Black Friday sale over at HeadtoHeadBattles.com. Go pick up something really nice. We have deck boxes, binders, field centers, play mats, and pretty much any TCG accessory you could possibly want. But all right, guys, I've taken up way too much of your time already. My name is Susu from Head to Head Battles, signing out. What's up, guys?
If you haven't subscribed, make sure to click that button right there in the middle.
Also, if you haven't watched that video that YouTube is recommending you, it's probably crazy, alright? Go watch it. This is Susu from HeadtoHead Battles.
Judge of Red Dead Battle.
Signing out.